Today I'm switching things up and letting you call the shots. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I'm changing things up and incorporating themed days into my review channel. So I will be posting an announcement video with a lot more details, so look for that, or I'll be leaving a link in the description below. But regardless, today is now Subscriber Suggestion Sunday, and today's first suggestion comes to us from Rotted Soul and subscriber John Boyd, and this is 2018's Lifechanger. Now, I knew nothing about this movie when I watched it based on the suggestion, and I never even heard of it before. And what I came away with was a movie that had a very interesting premise, a bit of a thought experiment as far as what would I do in this situation, and a fairly decent core conflict, but ultimately predictable outcome. And all told, I did find it an enjoyable watch. But to get into more details on that, let's get into the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot of this one I gave a 16 out of 25. This followed the main character, who I am going to leave nameless just because I think that's a little bit spoilery and kind of weaves its way into the plot, as well as being a bit ill-defined. But regardless, it is the main character who is narrated through voiceover simply because it has the ability to change bodies in the form of kind of a takeover metabolism metamorphosis. If he runs into you while he is in a state of flux change and grabs you, or you touch him in any way flesh to flesh, then this entity will take on your appearance, leaving you a shriveled husk of a dead person, and then he's free to move on from there. And this change can sometimes, the voiceover kind of explains it. He's kind of in what he considers to be the last throes of his life cycle, potentially. He describes earlier in his life that, a change, he could go on for years. And now it almost seems like just days or potentially even hours before he is forced to find another host. And the real core conflict of this one comes into play when he describes a familial situation that he used to be involved in, a wife that he used to have, and was forced to give up that life when he was forced to make this metamorphosis change, and had to move on and basically abandon her. But he didn't really abandon her. It's just in her perception he did. And instead, he kind of just keeps tabs on her from a distance, sometimes goes up to her, talk to her at the bar as somebody else, and engage with her in conversation to scratch that itch. It's a little bit of a lovelorn, love-lost kind of situation. And the conflict comes into play of just generally living and surviving while also exploring this love and not wanting to give it up, and also wanting to be honest with her, and how well that goes. I think the real biggest sin of this movie is the fact that there were really not a whole lot of surprises for me. This was almost like watching a movie that I had seen before many times, even though I never ever have. Every outcome to where this movie was going was something that I had kind of seen coming along the way, and it was more just watching it play out. If you ever look up, if you Google Pixar's take to on storytelling, I think they have something like 22 rules of storytelling, and one of them I couldn't help but think about, and that's take the first idea that you have about what would happen in this situation, and then throw it away. And then take the second and throw it away, and the third and then throw it away, and then take the fourth or the fifth or the sixth, and just continually challenge yourself. Throw out the obvious and really make something pop. As far as once we get the obvious things out of the way, then we focus on things that will surprise the audience and take it in a direction that perhaps we as writers don't even realize. And that is one of their guides to storytelling. And I really, really like that, and it really brought that to my mind as I was watching this, is this seemed like every step of the way it was taking the obvious choice. The ultimate resolution to the conflict towards the end, I knew that that would happen. And again, it was less being surprised by a movie with an intricate plot and more just kind of watching it unfold as I expected it to. So all told, I thought the plot was pretty good as far as taking this thought experiment of, if I was in this situation, how would I survive? What steps would I take? Would I ingratiate myself with the old host's family, or would I live a complete life of solitude? Things like that. It was an interesting thought experiment, and I thought that ultimately it was well fleshed out. It's just, again, a bit predictable. So weighing all of that, I really couldn't give it more than 16 out of 25 points there. The Intent, I gave 15 out of 25. I kind of struggled with this one, trying to find out what this movie's intent was. It didn't really seem like it had a very clear direction towards that end. What it really seemed like is you had this really interesting idea of this skinwalker kind of mythos, of this transforming entity, and kind of binding it all together with the singular voice, male voice voiceover done by Bill Oberst Jr. And taking this idea and then running with the what would you do with it. And, what would that look like in the real world? What challenges would this idea face? What restrictions would the individual have? The rules and so forth of their living situation. And then how would that reflect on a lifetime of experiences? And then take this interesting idea and then draw it out into an hour-and-a-half long story with a core conflict and a resolution of the core conflict. And I just feel like that really shouldn't have been necessarily the focus. It shouldn't have been trying to sell the idea and make it interesting as a story. It should have been trying to sell a story with the idea is the vehicle to be used. One of the best examples I can really think of when I'm trying to think of exactly what I'm attempting to explain here is Memento. That's a fantastic movie by all rights, in my opinion. And I think one of the things that really makes it great is the fact that it is a compelling story, all told. Yes, it's about a guy that lost his short-term memory, and yes, it's told in the style of backwards film, scenes, backwards scenes kind of assembled in a backwards format. But that's honestly ancillary. That's the vehicle that makes it possible to tell what ultimately turned out to be a really great story with Guy Pearce and Joe Pantoliano and their interaction with one another. And ultimately, it was a way to tell this story, and that's really what the goal should be. It shouldn't be to take this idea and wrap a story around it and try to sell the idea. It should be instead trying to tell the best story you can, using this idea as the vehicle to make it happen. And as far as what the intention of this movie was, I don't think it really had quite the impact that they were going for necessarily. It certainly wasn't scary. I don't know if scary was even the point of it. It seemed just a bit dark and macabre, and I think that was ultimately the point of it. It was a bit of a tragic, romantic tale, and even though it was a bit watered down, I did like it. It may sound like I'm not. I just think it was perhaps a little bit off target. That's how I feel about it. So 15 out of 25 for The Intent. The acting, I gave a 17 out of 25. I actually thought there were pretty good performances. Laura Burke as Julia Wilson, who is the main character's ex-wife. Jack Foley as Robert, who is one of the principal characters that metamorphosize and interact with Julia, and he's just kind of an interesting character. I thought he performed it well. He has a beard you could sharpen a shovel with, and that was an interesting thing to watch on screen. Just an interesting aesthetic. I wasn't entirely sold on it, but regardless, I did like the performance by Jack Foley. And the real standout for me was honestly Bill Oberst Jr.'s voiceover. The voiceover in this one, it wasn't forced, it wasn't tired, it explained things pretty well, and I actually liked how it played out. It was an interesting element to have it in there as a binder for the character and get the audience on board with who he was with this consistent element, and I did like that they just kept it to one voice. And the technical, I gave a 17 out of 25 as well. And the voiceover was, keeping it to one voice, I would consider to be a technical thing there. I did like that. But the camera work, the editing, that all served the story well. Nothing really detracted from it. But ultimately, there was just really some good practical effects in this one. Good makeup work, and especially towards the end, some interesting special effects going on that I really dug. It was kind of an interesting kind of creature effect element to this one that I really liked. And I don't know, it was simple, but it was well executed. So I have no problem giving 17 out of 25 for the technical there, above average. And that gives us a total of 65 out of 100 points. This was a decently told, bittersweet, kind of horror-y fairy tale thought process experiment kind of thing. It was multi-layered, and I would ultimately recommend it. I did enjoy it. I honestly just wish that it was willing to take more risks. And as far as me being 27 steps ahead of every turn of this movie, that might not be the case for everybody. It might just be that I have parallel thought processes with writer-director Justin McDonnell. He and I might just take the same situation of, well, what would I do in this case? And then think along those lines. He and I just might be kindred spirits. So I can't really judge it based on that. All I will say is that I do think that although not mind-blowing or game-changing, this is worth a watch. And that's my review of 2018's Lifechanger. Thank you again very much for Rotted Soul and subscriber John Boyd for putting this one on my radar. If you want to leave suggestion, go ahead and put it in the comments below or on Twitter with the hashtag of Rotted Suggestion, and I will add it to the list to randomly be selected for next Sunday. Thank you very much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.